what I've seen is that group of people that at one time was really just supportive of one candidate has been splintered so much, even to the point. So the reason I even reached out to your team was that I sometimes put requests out to my audience on social media, say, "Hey, who should I interview?" And I had your name come up so many times. Get Dr. Shiva on, get Dr. Shiva on. Okay, great. And I announced that you're coming on. And even that, I had a lot of people that were so excited. Yet I had this other large part of the audience that they hated you. Yet these are people that are conservative. They have good values. And it's just what I've seen is just that even within the more conservative movement, that people have become so splintered into 100 different groups now. And I feel like I've never seen this much division in America. 'Cause it's not just A or B. There's actually like A through Z and then 1 through 100 in terms of what groups people are fitting into. And so, what do you think, from your perspective, is behind all this division, and how do we get past it?
Well, it's a really good question. I think the first thing to understand is that people seem to think that splintering and divisions are bad. I would argue it's a good thing. And I'll tell you why. What's happened is because of our effort, our movement's effort, and the work I've been doing, for me, it's been a long journey over 50 years. And as an activist, probably over the last 40 years. And then as an electoral participant, in the electoral process of running for office, you can, let's say, put that since the last 6-7 years. 2020, we were the ones who really led, that went global, many of these really important areas of election systems integrity, the censorship infrastructure that we discovered long before the limited hangout people came along. And then you can look at the real issues with the immune system during the quote unquote pandemic. If you look at all of that, I would argue that it was our effort that's helped in some way splinter all this in a good way. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why the splintering is really important, and it's not a bad thing. There's a slogan: if you do bodybuilding or you work out, or if you study any type of archetypes, you have to destroy before you can create. And so you have to be, the destructive force is as important as a creative force. The structures that have been built, particularly over the last, I would say since 1950, 1970 till today, were consolidations of power. Those structures went like this. They were typically the two structures that people typically saw. What they saw is the left and the right, Republican, Democrat, labor and conservative, right? You can go to every country. There were these typically two wings. That's what we call the obvious wings of the establishment. Those two wings are typically supported by the swarm. As I've defined it, if people go to shattertheswarm.com, if everyone hasn't seen it, it'll give you the elites themselves run beauty pageants. You say the global elites run beauty pageants, knowing that any of their leaders, whether they're on their left or the right, Republican, Democrat, they do their own little gigs where you have to figure out who's, in the case of Zionism, who sucks most of the Zionist well, right? And in that layer, they select those people at a particular point. The elites essentially run these beauty pageants. That's what they are. And the election fraud becomes the way they run the beauty pageants, and we should talk about that. All right. The wings, the two obvious wings, also have their radical wings on the left and the right. The radical means the seemingly radical, who do enough to make sure that the people don't leave any one of the obvious wings. I've used this analogy. If you look at a bird and you look at the shoulders of the bird, those are the obvious establishment, and the wings are the left wing and the right wing that they use to keep people entranced to thinking that the bird is going to do something for them.
It reminds me so much of Edward Bernays' book Propaganda, where he basically describes this exact scenario and saying that the average person doesn't have the mental capacity to decide between more than two choices. And so it's the elite's job to construct two different options for them, Coke or Pepsi, red or blue, and just present these two options. But it's really the people that are presenting the options that are controlling things. It's exactly what he laid out in his book. And I think it was 1928 he wrote that book. Just incredible that it's exactly what you're talking about.
Encourage everyone, if you want to truly be liberated, go watch that video. And you can also see it at shattertheswarm.com. It's like a little movie. In 15 minutes, you're going to learn who the real enemy is from an engineering systems approach. Go to truthfreedomhealth.com, and I'll talk more about that. People can understand what is system science. But system science breaks you out of talons of this bird, out of the swarm, because you start raising your consciousness to see things beyond this dialectic. We need to build a bottoms-up movement. Go to shivaforpresident.com and volunteer.